Okay.
When I was 16, there was a kid in there who was 18. His father was in there, and his grandfather was in there. And they was all doing over 20. 3 generations just wiped.
We know that it's not that the children fail, it's that the system has been failing our children.
So who should be working and living and existing and offering the solutions to those traumatized young people from the community?
It's important to bring individuals from the community because they are dealing or have dealt with it directly.
Credible messenger mentors are people who have had experience in the justice system and want to get involved in trying to steer people out of the justice system because there's way too many people in the justice system.
It's kind of a stunning idea because here's the system saying
individuals who are ex-offenders are now being featured prominently as partners with justice systems to effect change in the community. This is a major paradigm shift going on.
the idea of a credible messenger has always existed.
And to me, being a credible messenger is a person that can go out there and persuade them to, change their life and want to spread the word about, listen, I've been in the streets, I've been locked up, I'm your age, you could change.
What makes me a credible messenger is that I'm impacted by the same systems. Family's been impacted.
Some people fear, like, what do you mean? Like, you're gonna put some ex-convict working with, like, my kid? And it's like, I wish I could show you, in this person's situation, like, this is exactly who you want working with your kid.
It positions credible messengers in communities that are being ravaged by crime and urban trauma and puts them in a position to be healers. It's a double impact. And that as you serve, it's redemptive and healing and restorative for you.
Our community has all the skills, the talent, but not the resource.
The center now, we have the opportunity to disseminate what we have learned about the approach, but more importantly, as a city, we can now train and cultivate and develop men and women and prepare them to reach the youth in their communities.
You could live in your hood, but you don't gotta be from your hood. You get what I'm trying to say? You don't gotta be a product of your hood.
It's about the community healing the community.
Credible messenger to me is a person that can spread the word to the youth and help, get them back on their feet because everybody falls.
Hello, and welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to Credible Messenger Justice Center, their second webinar series, the Vision for Civic Engagement. My name is Julio Medina, and I'm just proud to be a part of, play a small role in this Vision for Civic Engagement, and all that the Credible Messenger Justice Center is doing, not only in New York, but throughout the country. I want to welcome our guests. We thank you for joining us. But I get the distinct honor and pleasure of introducing Alejo Rodriguez, who will be leading the conversation around a vision for civic engagement. And when we think about civic engagement, we want to just talk about, in the justice impacted communities. This is a groundbreaking approach, right? Because it activates credible messengers to help break the cycle of intergenerational disenfranchisement, right? But a little bit about Alejo, because that was a mouthful. I've known Alejo for the last, I don't know, maybe 30 years. We can tell our age here, probably longer, 35 years. And as Alejo tells the story, we've probably known each other even longer than that. The unfortunate reality is I got to meet Alejo while I was in prison. I was serving a 12-year term, and I gravitated toward people who were doing the right thing, people who were running programs, people who believed in institutional change, even in the midst of being, in the belly of the beast. Watching Alejo continue to strive for better, watching Alejo continue to do this work, it was an inspiration. We ended up talking. We got up and to know one another. We actually worked out together. We used to jog together in the yard. I spent a lot of time with the brother, but I spent time with Alejo. Because of what he brought. The wealth of information that he brought, not only to me, but to so many of the other men inside, from different programs. I mean, the programs are too many to list that he was involved with or helped to create or help shape the lives that he touched of the men inside. You see them, you see the transformation that happens. I think, Alejo, I want to crown you today as one of the original credible messengers because, I think sometimes, we forget the gifts that were brought by people like you and you to so many of the younger brothers that were inside. But, Alejo, I think, as I introduce you, for me, one of the biggest things, man, and it sounds maybe simple in this introduction, brother, because, your accolades and all that you've done inside and outside can speak for themselves, But for me personally in this introduction, the perseverance that you showed throughout your 30 plus years has always been an inspiration to me. Because I remember every 2 years writing a parole letter for you. I remember saying, you know what, the brother can stay in my apartment if he's let out. And never once, at least that I know of, did you falter. Never once there was a day where you thought, well, maybe I'll die in here. You always look towards the future. And for me, and some of the work that I do today, you help, as you know, we don't need to, you helped inspire and shape any success that I have or that Exodus have is based on what you've provided while we were inside together. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the audience. I'd like to introduce everyone here to a brother, a true friend, an inspiration, someone who's moving the dial around civic engagement, not only in New York, but across the country, Brother Alejo Rodriguez.
Wow. Thank you, Julio, for that intro. It was so powerful. I'm like, I want to meet this guy. So thank you so much, brother. Really.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I want to thank, first take an opportunity to thank Department of Probation and DMJ, Credible Messenger team, all of y'all that put this together, this program. I know we had to make some adjustments because of COVID, because of social distancing, and as a team, you all have really was able to put this together, and so that it can still reach the individuals who are interested in this learn sharing opportunity. So thank you all for the work for putting this all together. And so I'm also going to just kind of put it out there. I really want to make this more like a learn sharing as opposed to just a simply presentation, speaking about what we're doing, but really how we got there, what are the concerns, and then really looking at this idea of how credible messengers can have a role, not just in reaching the youth who are at risk or other young individuals who are struggling to get their lives together, but also how credible messengers can better inform institutions, could better support their community, such as in roles of civic engagement, and in other ways as actually being intermediaries and just looking and expanding the notion of what credible messengers are capable of doing. Um, so before I dive in, kind of like want to just get a sense of what we're thinking when we talk about a vision of civic engagement. So I'd like to pose a question to the audience and just love to hear to get your feedback. You can put it in the chat box so others can see as well. But when you hear the term civic engagement, what does that mean to you? Peter, if you don't, yeah, thank you. What is civic engagement? General question. Just want to see what people are thinking of when we hear this term. And feel free to just put it off in the chat box. I okay. I'm not seeing any as 41 attendees. I'm not seeing it. Peter, are we getting any responses there, Peter?
There's a couple people chatting in the chat, in the event chat.
Okay, I see them. I see some now. Thank you, Lily. To me, civic engagement means actively working to benefit one's community, is Lily what Lily wrote. Um, Helen Montero, getting involved in community, the community you live in, be it meetings, events, etc. Engaging those who are, Lisa Johnson, engaging those who live and work in the community. Dawn Daniels, receiving authentic community feedback, wants and needs, dreams in their community. Ruben S. Austria, when I hear civic engagement, I think of a minimum of things like like voting, serving our community boards, etc. But at the fullest, I really think of full engagement resulting in community control over the institutions that shape life. Real, that's a very powerful statement. The idea of community control over institutions. Julio, do you see anything here that really speaks to you? Because I'm thinking about this idea of this community control over institutions, and it has always been an observation on my part that we understand institutions are put in place to support community and the people who live in it. It just seems at times that we are living to support institutions. It's like it's somewhere along the line, the paradigm's been shifted. And what I'm hearing from Ruben is to come back to the origins of what a community engagement could be about.
Yes, Alejo, I fully agree. And Ruben and many of the people on the chat are definitely experts in moving this conversation along. But there's some themes that seem to continually show up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Community leads from within, right? Engagement, authentic community, right? Servicing the community, right? An active participant within the community, engagement, what do we think about, the political aspects, right? Controlling our community, right? What are the resources and how do we control those resources as opposed to, always having to be on the opposite end of that, right? Also, we're looking at things when we talk about cultural competency, when we're talking about activism, we're seeing those words that are community-based, centered, and
Mm-hmm.
that really compel us, to talk about not only community and those things that control it, but what's our role and how can we actively engage in this process, right? How do we now move this to this next space? Because I think we all have lived in our communities. We know what it is, right? We don't need to go on listening tours to hear what's happening in our communities. So I think Alejo, a lot of the things that I'm seeing, right, is, a personal investment in a community. How do you feel about it? What is the collective plan, right? Community leading from within, again, authentic community engagement and community control. So we're hearing, you know, um, community, and it's our community, and how do we continue to uplift this community? And and not only for ourselves, right, for our family, for the future, for so many things that unfortunately our communities sometimes have been labeled as. How do we begin to make certain those labels don't stick, don't become to identify us as we are them? How do we control the conversation and the narrative moving forward?
Yeah, yeah, I agree, Julio. And what I'm seeing is a theme too, because oftentimes I remember when you and I first had this conversation about civic engagement, and I mentioned to you that there's political and non-political civic engagement, and your response was, well, what's non-political? Like civic, and a lot of people think that civic engagement is simply just the voting and the registration type of process, but it is also, for an example, unfortunate in many of the neighborhoods of color, we see or we learn of a youth who ends up getting murdered in an early age by a mural that's being put up, right? In some way or another, that isn't, oh, no, not some way or the other, that is an action of non-political civic engagement. The idea when people put a mirror up and they're putting candles, like they're rallying around the loss of life, the what has been lost to the community in this acknowledgement. And so here in this, and that's an example of how non-political civic engagement can take place. Unfortunately, especially in many neighborhoods of color, the idea of utilizing that as a springboard or pivoting into political action has not always been consistent. So, and Julio, your experiences, because you've been out longer than I have. So there's a lot you've been able to see in the communities as well as through the reentry process. What civic engagement had meant to you, or the lack thereof when you first came home, and yet even goes deeper than that, right? Before even going into prison, there's a lack of attention towards voting in our communities. So my question to you, who I'd like to ask you, why is it that historically people in marginalized communities do not vote?
I'm gonna go back to one of the things Mom said. And some of you guys know I'm a mama's boy. Mom's passed March 3rd, and
Mm.
I'm sorry, May 3rd. Mom's passed, and this is the woman who taught me everything, who I honor, and who just was you know the one person in one's life who could not, I could not do any wrong in her eyes, like many of our parents, right? But she would tell me this. We had these conversations. Unfortunately, a lot of them took place in the visiting room, and we would talk about civic engagement. Alejo, as you know, we were very conscious when we were in prison. So we were doing this work, back then. And I would ask my moms, why doesn't she vote? What, Mom, you're not voting, and what is it? And her response was simple: "Por qué?" And translation, for anyone who doesn't know, "Por qué" is why. Why should I vote? I live in Patterson Projects. My conditions will not change. I won't make more money. The direct impact on my life, nothing, absolutely nothing will be different. So why should I participate? And our conversations, many of the conversations, were around civic engagement, were around, but Mom, when you like to see a street light go on? Mom, when you like to see some other things? Mom, if you voted, it could be. But when we've been beaten for so long, right? When we've had to pave a way and make a way out of nothing, I think there's this apathy that takes hold that we have to now begin to break. And this is a generational apathy, right? So if I'm saying this about my mom, what did her mother tell her, right? Around the power to vote, around what does the ballot mean in our communities? We have, as we all know, we have districts in the Bronx that have the lowest voter turnout in the country, right? When we go to the polls, I think what we see, Alejo, and again, this is just historically and from some of the statistics that I've gathered, right? We become some of the lowest, voter turnout. When campaigns are happening, they're talking about the middle class. They'll talk about this. They'll talk about every other issue, but they won't talk about us. And if they talk about us, it's in a negative light, right? They're looting and they're rioting. So I think, when in asking that question, I think so. Some of the things again is breaking the maybe the generational curse that some of us, unfortunately, I'll speak for myself, have inherited around. Well, it's not going to change anything. We're still in the same position. Yeah, you go pull a ballot, but nothing is going to change. And then the second part of that is watching, when I was released, not having, the power to vote, and not feeling totally part of this new community that I was with, right? I came out with this new vigor to change the world, one community at a time, and trying to do all these things, but yet, my civic engagement, the opportunity to vote, has been barred because of my felony, right? And then watching over the last 20 plus years and over the last 2 years when the governor did, provide conditional pardons to over 25,000 people. This was in 2018, and now trying to figure out how many of us actually voted. I think we can begin to talk about civic engagement when we can begin to vote, and each one of those 25,000 people that were released that do have the right to vote realize that and go to the ballots and vote. I think until we begin to understand the power of that vote, till we begin to understand that last number, or pick any of those numbers, but that last number says whatever 1,000,009, it could have been 8 if I didn't vote. Let us learn about the Electoral College, right? And what does that mean? So I think civic engagement, Alejo, to listen to you, so for all the teachings that you've done, work, right? And again, I there's some work that I say we have to do to certain communities, to certain people in our communities that can at least begin to rekindle the light that says your vote or your lack of voting, right, puts people in office that have none of our interests whatsoever, in mind. So I think we just have to figure out ways on how we do that, how we get people that have been on the sidelines forever to engage. We should have bigger than, I believe the mayor won 9 million people in the city, right? And last mayoral election, I believe 1.5 million people. So you can win a vote with 15% of the population coming out to vote. And I think if we don't get those numbers up, we're going to continue to see some of the same things we've been seeing on a national level.
Yes, yes. And some other really good comments are coming in. Something that Ruben Austria also said, I remember my father saying, it doesn't matter who you vote for. They're all the same. The system is rigged. That's another attitude that we hear coming from, individuals who've been impacted or just living intergenerational disenfranchisement. This is not something that just happened out of the clear blue. It's something we want to acknowledge. Mm-hmm. This is something that happened, and the impact has turned people indifferent towards civic engagement and become, just very apathetic. And so in thinking about this, Julio, the idea of, because you mentioned you couldn't vote when you first came home, and that changed in many respects in 2018 when Como signed a partial pardoning allowing individuals on parole the right to vote, once if they're qualified and they can vote. But how has felony disenfranchisement perpetuated the disenfranchisement of marginalized communities?
I think, Brother Leho, that's it's a big question, and I'll do my best to try to tackle it from my limited perch that I sit on. But watching what's happening in the communities, and I think we all can tell a different story, right? As many of you know, I manage Exodus. I'm here now. I'm in East Harlem now, and we have whatever 75 people walking in here a day from these same communities we live from these marginalized communities. And I think the impact, when you think about the impact that it has, it's telling you, right? You're not, that 13th Amendment. You're not fully here. You're not fully here. Yeah, we let you out of prison. Yeah, you come into a program. Yeah, you live in a shelter. Or yeah, you're struggling to get through. So on top of this, we're telling you, you can't vote either. I think the impact that has on the individual also affects, of course, his immediate family, which now again, we can keep going with this ripple effect on what it's doing to our communities. What, that sense of apathy, if we don't begin to look at this through a different lens, right? The strength-based lens that talks about empowerment, right? That the peace plan that talks about so many of these things to get people engaged. But I think, when we overheard a conversation the other day, all right? So I'm on 123rd, 3rd Avenue, Alejo, you know where we at.
Yeah.
We go to Andy's, right? And that's a little restaurant for all our viewers that's on the corner here. And I'm not advertising for them. But we go there, we got to eat this every day. And we there, and a brother says, I'm voting for, Trump. So we couldn't help but say, wow. And he said, yeah, he gave me a stimulus check.
Wow.
Just think about that, right? Think about, and again, this is, this wasn't a judgment. This wasn't he's basing his decision when you're thinking about, marginalized communities, when you think about the impact that folk are having, when you're thinking about people coming home, he's basing his decision on the stimulus check that he got. Not on, anyway, I think it's when we talk about that impact, Alejo, there's a lot of work that we have to do. There's a lot of education that we have to do to begin to change some of the mindset, and how do we vote politically for people who have our interests, in their minds, and not something that's totally oppositional to what we believe in. So yeah, I think that the impact is very direct. That not being empowered to vote now affects this one person as he walks through life with this sense of, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this, and now it impacts the same community. Unfortunately, not in a powerful way, but in a more negative way.
So in many respects, as a reentry service provider that Exodus is, amongst other things that Exodus is doing in the community, but you started out as a reentry service provider. In many respects, what I'm hearing, what you're saying now, that when society doesn't provide returning citizens with the kind of resources to show that they're now working within the system, such as providing them with their civil rights, if you would, or withholding civic engagement rights, right? That it actually is counterintuitive to the reentry process.
Yeah.
It actually undermines the reentry process. So here it is, you're working, you're doing this work, making sure individuals get the resources they need, doing all the things that is at least tangibly can be done to support an individual's success. But we know the first 2 to 3 years is so critical when a person first comes home that
Yeah. Yeah.
in many, and there are a number of individuals, and we need to say this very clearly for those who do not understand the process of the very inherent process of the reentry process, that an individual could come home from prison, receive all the resources and benefits such as housing, going to school, they got a job. They can get all these things in place, but still feel disconnected from society because there hasn't been any community cohesion that's been developed. That social fabric has not been tapped into in a way that the person feels that they belong. And by denying or withholding civic engagement practices can also perpetuate that sense of disconnection. And there are many individuals working, family, and yet still end up going back to prison because they feel disconnected. So it's so important for us to realize the gravity of this. It's not just simply focusing on registration to vote. It's not just one election. It's not just who's in office, but really we're talking about what many of you out there have mentioned in your chat box, and that is how we can strengthen the community. And so thank you so much for some of your responses, Julio, because it's laying down some of the foundation of just thinking about civic engagement and what it means at the heart of it, not just in terms of in a broader sense. And so I'd like to go back to the question before that, Peter, not this question here. The question before that, because I didn't get a chance to thank you. We didn't get a chance to address this question. And the question here, and I would like for you all, once again, to contribute to this question in your chat box. What is the impact of redistricting and redlining on marginalized communities?
Alejo, hi, this is Tiffany. Some people have already started responding. We have Zach Martin.
Yeah. I see Zach. I want to hear others in as well. Yeah, Zach Martin has contribute. Intergenerational disenfranchisement is one harsh implications of redistricting and redlining through loss of collective power. Right? Collective power. We're talking about with the redlining, the breaking up of neighborhoods, or the redistricting for the sense of supporting political interests. As we know, redistricting more specifically is this idea of reshaping the communities so that individuals who are in office can strengthen their chances to be reelected. So it has less to do with the community and more to do with how people are voting in one specific geographical collocation. And while individuals are chiming in on this question, I like to share a personal story between myself and Julio. As Julio said, actually, I think we met in 1990, Julio. This was in Eastern Correctional Facility. And as you mentioned, a lot of programming, a lot of working together. And there was an affinity. Me and Julio got together, two brown Afro Latinos. It's like, oh, this guy's kind of sharp. He got something going on here. And so we gravitated, developed a friendship. Julio came out before 2000. Was that 97 you were released, Julio?
96.
um, in '96, and created within a couple of years created Exodus as a reentry program. And by the way, he took my ideas, but that's a different discussion. But but no, but he created Exodus and became a leader in the community in advocating that reentry can be reimagined through the eyes of those who were directly impacted and were going through the reentry process themselves. And then today, Exeter still is committed to that. Over 90% of their staff have direct criminal justice experience, and they are living credible messengers on a regular basis. Um, so he's been home in 96, and as Julio pointed out, has written letters in support of my release throughout 14 years of struggling with parole. I was sentenced to 18 years to life, and I was not released until after 32 years of incarceration. And Julio had been very critical in just consistently showing his support. When I came home, I started reconnecting with family, cousins, uncles, aunts, people I had not seen in years. And there was one cousin who told me that we had a cousin who lives in Albany, that I should talk to her because maybe she has some insights on work involved in this field. I spoke to Charlene Griffin, cousin of mine, sweetheart. She started talking to me about what's out there. She had worked in different organizations in New York City, so maybe she might have a lead for employment. And then she said, "Oh, by the way, you do know Julio's my uncle." And I had to ask, Julio who? Because the first person that came to mind was Julio Medina, but this could not be my cousin. And she said, yes, Julio Medina is my cousin. And this was probably the greatest gift besides being released, that I had a friend who I had appreciation for, who was a leader, who in many respects had was someone who I was aspiring to emulate. And I come to find out that this someone who I knew already was my relative. So when we hear these stories, it sounds very it sounds so supportive. It sounds like a good happy ending type of a story. We laughed when we first. I remember, Julio. Do you remember when we were on the phone for the first 5 minutes? We couldn't stop laughing just by the thought of we're family. That's all we kept on saying. You're my family, and just like tears of joy. But the reason I brought this into the conversation here had less to do with the good happy ending, but more so, I began to think about it in terms of how did our family lose contact? How did we not keep engaged with extended family members? So our family comes from Puerto Rico. Our families was probably in the first, they were in the first wave of Puerto Ricans coming to New York City. So our family has been in the city since the 1920s, 1930s. And we are second generation, third generation born in this country. The reason I'm bringing this up is because in many times when we hear the words God. Where am I at? I am so sorry. Someone called me and it just shut everything down. Sorry about that.
We talk about redistricting.
Yeah, when we talk about redistricting and redlining, we don't think about how, forget the civic engagement aspect, how redistricting can actually separate families, extended families, how redlining could have its impact on disconnecting family members from each other. Now, some people may think, well, how could that really have its impact? But when you think about in the city, most people live within a 4 block radius that, with the hustle and bustle, trying to make a living, trying to keep their work efforts, to sustain their family, putting food on the table. When you think about how these things become so much of a focused priority, that the idea of staying connected with extended family, in addition to ideas of voting and just getting involved civically, becomes almost like a burden. Like it's almost as if it's a privilege to stay connected with family members. It's not something that normally you would do, because the priorities is focused in on putting food on the table, paying rent. And these structures are not put in place by the people themselves who are living it. They're putting in place by systems that created it, such as redlining and redistricting strategies. So I just wanted to share this, that this is not just political, it doesn't just have political impact. It it lands in ways, and I'm talking about it is the redistricting and the redlining, doesn't just have political and economic features, or impact to people, but it breaks up family members. And when that cohesion is broken, it plays out in terms of, like Julio was saying earlier, why even vote? Why even get engaged with politics? Why even, do the things that other individuals do freely, when we're not being supported or being included in the political process or in the outcome of political processes? So we just wanted to just raise that up, that these terminologies, and it's something that Ruben had actually acknowledged earlier in saying, people, the need for civic engagement is in essence a need for taking control of the institutions that support the people. And we're not just talking about the politics of the people, we're also talking about the family members and community members and extended family members. And I've seen we have such a great deal. I love the comments that's coming up there. Love to see the fact that you all are engaged in this conversation. Can I see the next question I had up that you had before up, Peter? So when we think about redistricting, when we think about um, redlining, when we think about the lack of civic engagement, what comes to mind is the people who experience intergenerational disenfranchisement has become what we identify as being marginalized or disadvantaged communities, right? The disadvantaged communities, those who are most in need of the advantages of voting, are the ones that are most disconnected or disengaged. And so, what does it say about us? What does it say about a democratic society that it has marginalized or disenfranchised or disadvantaged communities? That's the question now that we're shifting into. What we like to say, and I'm just elaborating on this question a little more deeper. But we like to say we're a democracy, that people have the freedom. We are against tyranny, that we are against a lot of other schisms that oppress people. And yet, as a democratic society, we have what we call marginalized or disadvantaged communities, like people who live outside of that structure. What does that say about our sense of democracy if we are okay with these terminologies to describe communities, communities of color? One thought that comes to mind, um, in as much as we like to say we're a democracy, if we have to seriously think about how much is this part of having disadvantaged communities intergenerationally, that we, in essence, have been living out a caste system, whereas individuals who are living in another kind of New York, individuals of color who are living in like a second class existence. Okay, so can I see the third question, Peter? So thinking more specifically, we've been talking so far very generally, and opening the space for what we think in general civic engagement is about and the lack thereof. But more specifically, in looking at it from the lens of a credible message and the potential that credible message can contribute to this discussion, how is felony disenfranchisement connected to intergenerational disenfranchisement? That's the question at hand. What is the connection between the two? How do we see it? How do we see so and the origins of felony disenfranchisement, rooted and tethered in New York State? It's within its own constitution. I believe in Article 1, Section 1 and Section 3, they address or speak to why the individuals who have a felony cannot vote while they're incarcerated or under supervision. Maribel Vasquez asks, what is disenfranchisement? Thank you. And it's so important that we have clarity. So disenfranchisement is not having the civic, not having the the rights to be, your rights not being honored to be involved civically. So that with people who are dealing with voter suffrage, who cannot vote, people cannot participate in politics, they have been disenfranchised because it's the voting in many respects that can speak to the issues of their community and what's needed within their own community. But if they have the power, or if their power has been stripped away from them based on, in this case, an individual who committed a felony who no longer has a right to vote in some states, in New York State, it's people who are still under the supervision. They no longer have the right to vote. When this happens, they have become disenfranchised. And you're welcome, Maribel. She said, thank you for the response. Um, Harriet contributes right. These decisions about development of cities' infrastructure destroyed communities. If you haven't read The Color of Law, it's by Richard Rothenstein, and it tells how its situation is replicated throughout the whole country. And she's here, Harriet is referring to redlining, and The Color of Law is an excellent book. It's something you definitely should look into if you want to learn more about redlining and its impact and how it has been structured to favor certain neighborhoods for those who have money in comparison to those who do not. Dawn Daniels, thank you so much for this response, Dawn. How is felony disenfranchisement connected to intergenerational disenfranchisement? Dawn Daniels wrote, it is an extension of slavery and ties to the ways by which voters of color are kept from exercising their right to vote and to be recognized as citizens. So I just stop there. I'm so glad that you touched on this, Dawn. As we know, I just want to take a step back and understand contextually. In slavery, slaves didn't have the right to vote. Right? As an abolishment of slavery, and I say abolishment with an asterisk. I say that because in the 13th Amendment, there is a clause that tells us that slavery still exists, right? That slavery no longer exists based on race, except, and it's the exception clause, it can be utilized by those who committed a felony. So it really calls the question, it should cause us to question, has the United States truly abolished slavery? Or has it been modified? It has abolished slavery based on race, but it has been modified in many respects to be utilized in enslaved or putting people who have been put in prison as slaves. This is something that came up in the black codes in the post or after the Civil War, after the Emancipation Proclamation. Within 20 to 30 years, we have the black codes, and we have our first wave of mass incarceration, of imprisoning black people based on the color of their skin from minor offenses, giving them long-term sentences to put them back to work as slaves on the same plantations that they had been freed from. It's an aspect of social control in this way. An aspect that when Jim Crow laws came into place, we've seen like a tempering of this push to lock blacks up because they have been relegated to second-class citizenship based on equal but separate policies. And then once again, after the dismantling of segregation in the 60s through the civil rights era, within 20 years, we have this new growth of mass incarceration, of locking up black and brown bodies based on essentially the color of the skin, receiving long-term sentences for minor offenses, right? Or just getting people caught up in the system through through plea bargainings. So there is a history there that has been intergenerational and is tied and is tethered in many respects to the existence of slavery and how this has been modified until the current day. It's important that we understand this because as we think about why people in the community are not voting, when we think of why individuals may feel that it's okay to commit crime within their own community, this is not something that just happened out of the clear blue. This, in many respects, is a reaction to structural systems put in place to keep people relegated in Yeah, in some form of fashion of social control. So what I would like to do now is that I would like to shift to a video that we put aside. Because now that we kind of and I'll give you a second, Peter, to set that up, and I'll tell you when we want it. But I just want to just introduce this part. Now that we kind of like laid a foundation of the need for civic engagement in the community or the void, and almost acknowledging and honoring the distrust that in understanding, I should say, better understanding the distrust that people in communities of color have towards politics. The complaints have some legitimacy. Yet the question is, how can we legitimately now pivot that into action? And this is where the vision comes in. This is how we can begin to look at how credible messengers can be looked at as civic engagement educators, not just for those who've been directly impacted by the system, but for those in the community who has a total distrust towards politics altogether. So, Peter, it's a rap video that kind of breaks down civic engagement and some of the complaints that has occurred that people are expressing in the community. So, Peter, can you show the video, please?
More than enough to become the 44th President of the United States. He will be the first African-American President of the United States.
I've been broke all my life, but I kept hope all them nights. You see business in my city? Yeah, they closed all them twice. I was just riding down Salem, all them damn potholes I can't drive. I know y'all can fix it faster, but I know y'all won't try. Don't nobody care about us, and that's why I don't vote. Voted for Obama back in 2012. I remember that's when I had hope. He was saying, yes, we can. And everybody got less food stamps. And when I turned 21, I was still broke. I'd never vote again. I don't think I ever had a president make my life better. Did it all on my own. Ain't no politician ever do a nice gesture. I don't even know the mayor's name. I ain't never seen her one time ever. Tell me how she gonna help the city. What I'm supposed to do, write letters? What I'm supposed to do, blame Trump? He ain't never really gave a ain't nobody raised minimum wage. None of these jobs pay enough. I think they just want to keep us broke, cause they ain't putting nothing in place for us. This how all my people feel, but we gotta learn. We complained enough, let me change it up. Everything I just said, everybody I know think the same way. See, they don't want to see us vote, and we never do, so we see the same thing. But all our votes really do count, and they'll never really let it show. So now I'm finna break it down, cause if I don't, you would probably never know. First thing first, you know back in middle school when they taught us, it was 3 branches of the government. We forgot it when we got older. It's the judicial, the legislative, and executive. But all we know is the executive. That's the mayor or the governor and the president. Now none of them 3 people make no laws, they just be checking them. The laws come to their desk and all they do is say no or yes to it. So when the news station tried to tell us that Barack Obama couldn't put us on, we was all salty at Obama when it was the Congress members all along. We gotta focus on the legislative branch. Yeah, they the ones that make the laws. Yeah, they the ones write how much food stamp money you get on the card. But when people that wanted to help us wanted the job, I know they probably lost. Cause we ain't even know their name, we ain't know their face, we ain't know it all. So the Congress or the State House, that's legislative, they make laws. So what we want from the president is what they do. Okay, y'all? See, they election every 2 years, but we don't never even go to those. The Congress, they can raise minimum wage, but we ain't even really know it though. So you know how back in 08, when we all voted for Obama, we was all supposed to go back in 2010 and vote for the Congress. Cause they the ones make child support laws. They the ones choose if your kids at school get to eat steak or corn dogs. The State House make the court costs. So if the country failed, then you can't say it's them, it's your fault. Cause y'all ain't know to vote for Congress members that was for y'all. And they don't gotta leave after 4 years, and we just let them sit. See, they don't wanna tell you this, they want you to focus on the president. Now the 3rd branch is the judicial, that's judges. They the reason why John Crawford and Trayvon ain't had justice. So when Meek Mill got locked up just for popping willies, we blame the judge and not the city when they let her get voted in, cause they ain't know who to vote against. Imagine life on the other side. Roads better, schools better, everybody get their license back, grocery store food better, custody of your kids back, homeless people get new shelters. If we we gon' fix the U.S., we gotta start with them 2 letters, me and you. Somebody told us that the government wanna keep us broke, but the only reason why those people in the government is cause we ain't vote. And I ain't talking about the president, I'm talking about the ones we ain't know. See, they was gonna try to keep it low, but it's gonna hurt them when they see the polls.
Every time you stay home, someone is making a decision about you, making decisions about the air you breathe, the water you drink, the food your kids eat, and how much money you bring home every 2 weeks. So every time you sit out an election, every time you don't show up because you think it doesn't matter, someone else is happy that you didn't show up, so they can make that decision for you. Vote. Vote.
Powerful piece. For those who are interested, Tiffany placed the link to that video in the chat box. So please feel free to use it and share with your in the participants who are in your organizations or in your programs. Very powerful video. There's so much being said and taught in the video, but I would just like to look at 2 aspects in how the video was actually produced. And in the first half of the video, the young man pretty much outlined the complaints that people have in the community with politics. And in the second half, he pivots into this classroom. There was one, I think Abdul had asked, we talk about civic engagement, what kind of civic engagement could we get involved in? Let me get that right. I don't want to misquote Abdul here. While civic engagement is critical, what type of civic engagement should we be involved in? And I myself, I'm not going to point out one aspect of civic engagement is better than the other. I do think that education about civic engagement is so critical. And yet education about civic engagement, the traditional way of talking about civic engagement, looking at the branches of government, presenting it in terms of a structure, it's not landing in a way that engages people within our community. So what we've done in Exodus, when I was working at Exodus and helping to design a vision for civic engagement, we developed in what we call the Peace Plan: participatory education in advocacy and civic engagement. And the Peace Plan essentially looks at how we can implement an educational and a training component that doesn't put the laws first, that doesn't put politics first, but puts the people first. That means their voice, their concerns, their complaints, listening and acknowledging why people are apathetic towards politics, but utilizing that apathy, because in that apathy there's like a kernel of truth. There's an analysis in that apathy, and pivoting from the apathy into action. So by putting people first is actually starting with their complaints and then asking, well, what can we do about it? Where as opposed to looking at, as the young man said, all they want us to focus in on the president or the executives within the state, within government, that we begin to shift our attention to local politicians, the legislators, assemblymen, and all the other individuals who are represented in the communities that we live in, and focus in on that. There has been studies that has shown that when people, actually it was a study in San Antonio, Texas, that encourage the individuals in the community to focus in on local politics. That's all. They didn't focus in on government or state, just focus in on local politics, because through local politics, people begin to see the results of their voting. If it's a lamp, if it's a light on the street, like Julio pointed out earlier, that needed to be fixed, and all of a sudden it is now fixed. People see that, and they begin to develop this sense of, okay, we got the success on this one issue, let's go on to another. So one of the ways in which we look at engaging people about civic engagement is through education and focusing on local politics. The engagement, or the education I should say, is really an education starting not from why or how civic engagement is so important, or the Constitution and everybody got the right to vote, that all men were created equal. Like, we're still struggling with that definition. What does that mean? All men created equal, and we're living in marginalized communities. So, as opposed to starting from this constitutional endorsement of civil rights, we focus more in on what has been the impact of voter suffrage, of intergenerational disenfranchisement, and really finding the worth in their complaint, and then looking to educate from where they're engaged. Secondly, or another aspect of our strategies is to not just create this education to now send people out into the field to knock on doors to register to vote. It's important, that needs to be done. Like at Exodus, we have had several voter registration tables right there on 3rd Avenue between 123rd and 124th, and we're registering people, 25, 30 people a day. We're usually out there once a week. So we're doing that work. But we also have learned from the data that it shows that people tend to vote when they are encouraged and supported by others who they know also vote. So people tend to vote, voters tend to have come from family where voting was also very much an active, like families was active already in voting. So it gets passed down to the children. Another way in which the civic engagement or through voting has really shown its results has been when there's dialogue between community members, when there's ongoing conversations, when there's an informal educational process and a informal sense of accountability about civics, that when these things happen, people tend to vote. Surprisingly, we also learned that voter registration does not always result in voter participation or voter turnout. For an example, in East Harlem, where Exodus is located, we kind of find out that we're about 100 out of the 120,000 people, and as a rough estimate, that lives in East Harlem. 90%, 80%, it's like somewhere between the two. So we'll say 85% of the people are actually registered to vote. However, only 15% of registered voters are actually registering. So there's a disconnect. So, when you have 80, 90% of people register, there's an interest in politics, and then something happens. Maybe they don't like the candidates. Maybe they don't like the fact that it's a waste of time in which they feel. And in some communities, voting, they don't have the privilege to vote because sometimes getting off of work might mean them losing their job. So it's a privilege. But needless to say, you have in East Harlem alone over 50,000 people who are registered and are not voting, and that estimate is shown approximately the same way in different neighborhoods throughout the city, in West Harlem, in Central Harlem, Washington Heights, Morrisania, Mount Haven, Bed-Stuy, Brownsville, similar traits, where you actually have more people registering and yet they are not voting. So taking those things into account, what we have designed as a way to involve credible messengers is to, one, those who have the inclination and leadership drive to want to get involved with civics, to have a whole new educational look at what civic engagement is, starting from the ground up, starting from the issues that people that are impacting their communities and working those issues all the way up. After that, we have what we called the engagement strategy, in which we begin to train civic engagement credible messengers in a way that for them to support their success in doing outreach. That is, providing them with tools and how to manage a case plan so they can keep records of how they have been engaging with people in their community. Finding, really focusing in on like just 10 people, as opposed to doing this door-to-door knocking. Focus in on 10 people, 15 people, and keep a record of your conversations. Keep a record of next steps, of the issues that they are plagued with, as a way to develop an ongoing relationship, a way of developing an authentic relationship. And then the last phase is the empowerment phase. So we have the education phase, the engagement phase, in which they actually receive training in case management, in motivational training, and trauma-informed care. Like, it's so important that we realize that in the engagement phase as well. People have been traumatized by intergenerational disenfranchisement. This trauma is created a community trauma. And yet, all the work that we hear that's rising to attention around trauma focuses in on the individual. How do we help heal the individual in trauma-informed care? There's very little work out there about community trauma care. How can we begin to support communities as a whole? So when we have this engagement phase and we're working with credible messengers, really giving them extra tools in their tool belt, if you would, in regards to motivational interviewing, as well as trauma-informed care, to acknowledge that these issues are present in these communities, and let's not act as if they don't exist. Once again, simply knocking on doors, asking people to vote, standing in Times Square, or Union Square and, asking individuals to register to vote. Great ambition. I love to see it, but it doesn't always turn out into voter participation. So it is up to us, community members as a whole, to reinvent better engagement strategies. And coming from individuals who've been directly impacted by the system, we are also interested in representing community that well. And this is why we came up with this vision that we are slowly but surely actualizing. We've been doing the voter registrations. We've been holding some discussion groups at Exodus around civic engagement. So it doesn't just become like we have this program that's going to change everyone's life. More so, an opportunity for individuals to invest in themselves in transforming their life. So in essence, this is what we look at in terms of our vision towards civic engagement, in acknowledging that the people that we're looking to reach, there's so much they have on their plate that we need to acknowledge the things that they're struggling with to better position ourselves to make like real, authentic community engagement strategies that develop into civic action. Julio, we're soon to be wrapping up in about 15 minutes, I believe. Is there anything else that you wanted to add to this discussion? Or highlight
Yes,
what you said?
Hello?
Yeah, can hear
Hello?
you. Yeah.
Okay, yep, perfect. So no, thank you, Brother Lejo and the guests. This was definitely, rich, amazing. But and you think about the peace plan and kind of how we really look at this as a whole. I think it's important. I just want to say this, to all our listeners, to folk who look at this video, we too, as the roles that we play, right? And this is not an indictment on us, right? Because I do this to everyone. But in the roles that we play, we too got to step out our comfort zone, right? To really look at a population that's not voting and say, how do we engage you? We recently, about 3 weeks ago, we had, a bunch of different gang members in the building, right? And our goal was to talk about that, right? What are some of the things that you're looking for? And bottom line, how do we get you to vote? So, the civic engagement process is very real. And, a lot of the same answers, right? We're hearing a lot of the same answers, right? But I think, I don't want us, well, let me talk about myself, all right? I never want to get comfortable in this role that I'm in while the communities around me are hurting, while in East Harlem, the gang violence is at an all-time high, right? We're still failing as we think about this process, right? We're still failing our young people, and it continues. And I think for me, I will talk about myself here. For me, I'm realizing more and more I'm stepping out of the comfort zone. The executive director, Julio, none of that's important if lives are being lost. Kids that don't ever get a chance to vote because their lives were cut short at 16, right? So when we think about civic engagement and all that it entails, I think, the gravity of the conversation, I don't want it to fall on deaf ears. I want us to be able to use this Alejo as one of the anchors in the work that we do. I hope this isn't a Zoom call, the final Zoom call, and we kind of go back to our respect. It is your call to action. I take very seriously. Your call to action for us to do something is very personal for me. So, I just, if I could leave anybody, with anything, it might be time for us. It's definitely time. It's not might. It's definitely time for us to even become more creative in our strategies to make sure, our young people stop killing each other, that the educational and empowerment and engagement and all those things to the peace plan happen. That's none of that stuff happens without funding. None of that stuff happens without the things that are necessary to make. Uh, and in all the comments, I think I'm hearing this, right? I'm hearing about community. I'm hearing about community engagement. I'm hearing about taking back our communities. I'm hearing, community participation, engagement. Again, these words are so important, but they can't be just words, right? We, especially us, right, as leaders in this field, have to begin to look at things from a very different lens, to really get our people out to the polls for civic engagement, for all these things to happen, right? To take control of these communities are not going to happen if we're afraid to speak to certain gang members or certain populations that are in that community. So I think it's just, I thank you. I definitely thank the guests. Really appreciate it. I got so much out of this, Alejo. Watching you and watching your growth has always been amazing for me. So continue to do what you do. And I salute you, brother.
Thank you. Thank you, fam. So in wrapping this up, I want to say, because Maribel had asked a question, are classes or meetings that people can attend virtually that would teach the ABCs of civic engagement? And at the time right now, Maribel, we do not have classes going, but we are working on have something going post-election time. Our perspective, we've been doing the work and registering people, doing some work, but it's also, the conditions that communities of color have experienced is not going to be changed simply because Trump is or is not in office. It's not going to be changed simply because individuals have been registered to vote. This is intergenerational damage has been done. And so this is a long-term strategy, and to continue this work after the election to keep the movement going, in preparing for when legislature, like the young man put in the video, how important voting for Congress is, so that we get the momentum going. So we're going to focus on trying to put together a structure. We already have a curriculum, and looking to get started hopefully by the beginning of the year, where we having classes for leaders, for credible messengers, individuals who can also be willing to become facilitators. Right? We have a model that we call the peace plan, and looking for individuals to become leaders and trainers themselves, so that this thing starts to spread out like a fire throughout the whole community, and not just in one area. This is not just one program. This is not something that simply because we developed it, that we're claiming to be the only individuals. We have a monopoly on it. No, this is something for the people. This is something for us to give in contribution to our overall growth and development. So Tiffany had mentioned that she would post my email in the chat box as well. Please do, Tiffany, so that individuals, if they want to get in contact with myself and or Julio Medina, you can also, Tiffany, put Julio's email on there as well. And yes, and so that pretty much wraps us up. Thank you all for your time. Thank you all for your participation. Love your feedback. And it's been your feedback that has really helped to get a sense of how this conversation is going. And so, your comments has just, for me, has shown that we've been hitting some very significant points that you all have been thinking of as well. but and still open to new insights. And so I feel I myself, as a facilitator of this, I feel very engaged by your participation. So thank you all. Thank you, Department of Probation and the Credible Messenger team. You know, Lily, Helen, Tiffany, Peter, and all those other individuals behind the scenes. Thank you all so much. And I guess we'll be in touch in the future. And that's pretty much all I have to say. I'm gonna keep on rambling and make a fool out of myself if I don't just shut up right now. So I'm just going ahead and say goodbye. And thank you.
Hello, everyone. How are you? My name is Tiffany Branch. I am the coordinator for the Credible Messenger Justice Center. I would just like to extend thanks to Alejo for this wonderful presentation, and definitely Julio Medina, CMJC Advisory Council member and CEO of Exodus. We definitely appreciate you having this discussion in this safe space where we are able to have such powerful dialogue. Again, I would like to thank the audience for contributing, for joining in the conversation. And last but not least, I want to inform everyone that the next webinar series number 3, Healing Wounded Healers, is coming up November 18th from 3 p.m. to 4:30. Please join us. I am going to post the information in the chat box. You are able to copy and paste. Julio, if you don't mind, can you please put your email information into the chat as well?
Will do.
And that's the end. Please look out for the survey, which will come upon your screen once the meeting is ended. Thank you again, everyone. Have a good day.